A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headache.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Alright. Herman Puppleberry, we've got a good one today from Daniel. He wants us to trace the evolution of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, specifically that first critical power transition from Khomeini to Khamenei.
Oh, that's a fascinating pivot point. Most analysis focuses on the Guards' current influence, but the DNA of their political dominance was coded in that 1989 succession. It's the original template.
And a template that's looking rather relevant again lately, wouldn't you say?
It's directly relevant. The mechanisms they built then are the ones being leveraged now. By the way, fun little meta note, today's script is being generated by DeepSeek v3.2.
A friendly AI writing about power transitions. How perfectly recursive. So, let's set the scene. April 1979, the revolution is fresh.
Right. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is founded by Ayatollah Khomeini's decree on April 22nd. It's crucial to understand its founding charter. It was not meant to be a replacement for the regular military, the Artesh. It was a parallel force reporting directly to Khomeini with one job: guard the revolution.
Guarded from whom?
From everyone. From external threats, sure, but more importantly, from internal counter-revolutionaries, from the old military establishment they didn't fully trust, and eventually from the Iranian people themselves. Its institutional DNA was paranoia and political loyalty above all. Think of it this way: if the Artesh was the shield of the nations, the IRGC was the shield of the regime. That distinction is everything.
So they start as this small, ideologically pure militia. What about 10,000 strong?
Roughly, yes. Poorly equipped, more fervor than firepower. They were essentially Khomeini's personal Praetorian Guard. Then, in September of 1980, Saddam Hussein invades. The Iran-Iraq War becomes this 8-year crucible that forges the IRGC into something entirely different.
This is where the institutional evolution kicks into high gear.
Completely. They couldn't just be a militia anymore. They had to become an army. They went from 10,000 to over 100,000 personnel by the war's end in 1988. They developed their own command structure, their own logistics, their own asymmetric warfare doctrine. And critically, they created the Basij.
The volunteer militia.
More than a militia, a mass mobilization tool. They mobilized over 1 million Basiji volunteers during the war. This wasn't just about manpower, it was about building a vast, decentralized network of loyalty that permeated every town and village. It gave them a social control mechanism that lasted long after the trenches. But let's not gloss over the war's impact. It was a brutal, grinding stalemate. How do you think that shaped the IRGC's worldview?
I'd imagine it forged a deep sense of both siege mentality and institutional pride. They were the ones holding the line, often with human wave tactics. That creates a powerful narrative. We saved the revolution.
And that narrative became a source of immense political capital. They weren't just soldiers, they were martyrs in waiting, the true believers. This gave them a moral authority that rivaled, and in some circles surpassed, that of the clerics who stayed in Qom. The war also gave them their first taste of real economic power. They had to build roads, supply lines, weapons. They couldn't rely on the old, often suspect industrial base, so they started their own companies.
Which brings us to the economic foothold, even before Khomeini dies.
A key point. By the mid-1980s, the IRGC wasn't just a military force, it was a major contractor. This is the embryonic stage of what would become the Khatam al-Anbiya conglomerate. They were learning how to run a parallel economy out of necessity. And all this happens while Khomeini is alive. He's the spiritual founder, the commander-in-chief. But by the late 80s, he's aging. The war is ending in a stalemate. The IRGC has grown into this beast, but it's still theoretically Khomeini's beast.
Until June 3rd, 1989. Khomeini dies, and this is the moment. The regime faces its first real existential test. Can it transfer supreme authority without the founding charismatic leader?
And the IRGC is sitting there with 100,000 troops, an intelligence wing that had been formally established just a couple years prior, and a massive, if still informal, economic footprint from wartime contracting. They are the most organized, most armed faction in the country.
The constitutional crisis was real. The Assembly of Experts had to select a new supreme leader, but there was no clear successor. Khomeini had disowned his own chosen heir, Ayatollah Montazeri, a couple years earlier. The field was open.
Right. Montazeri was under house arrest, a reformist critic, so who was left? There were senior clerics like Ayatollah Mohammad Reza Mohammedavi Khani or the more politically active Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. But the process was shrouded in secrecy. How does it play out? The popular narrative often simplifies it to Khamenei just being the next guy.
That's the big misconception. Ali Khamenei was not a predetermined, obvious choice. He was a mid-level cleric, not a top-ranking marja or source of emulation. He had political experience as president, but religiously, his credentials were thin. The selection by the Assembly of Experts was contentious, and this is where the IRGC's influence became decisive.
Their loyalty was the currency.
Precisely. In that 48-hour power vacuum after Khomeini's death, the regime needed stability above all. The IRGC, with its guns and its networks, was the only institution that could guarantee a peaceful transition. They signaled very clearly that they would accept the choice of the clerical establishment, but only if that choice was agreeable to them. Khamenei was agreeable. He was a known quantity. He'd worked with them during the war, and he wasn't powerful enough to threaten their newly won autonomy. But let's be concrete. What did that signal actually look like? Was it backroom meetings, public statements?
Both. Senior IRGC commanders, like Mohsen Rezai, who was their top commander at the time, were in constant contact with the Interim Leadership Council. There were no overt threats, but the message was understood. Any succession that destabilized the country or marginalized the guards would be problematic. Their sheer presence was the argument. And Khamenei was a compromise candidate who wouldn't rock the boat. Rafsanjani, who was a political kingmaker at the time, likely saw Khamenei as someone he could work with or perhaps manage.
So they backed him, and in return,
he cemented their role. The 1989 constitutional revisions that happened right around the succession are key. They formally enhanced the supreme leader's power, making him the ultimate arbiter of all state matters, and created structures that gave the IRGC a direct pipeline into the core of the state. For example, the supreme leader's representative office within the IRGC was strengthened, blurring the line between command and oversight. The IRGC didn't just get a friendly supreme leader, they got a supreme leader whose legitimacy was, in part, underwritten by their military power. It was a symbiotic deal.
a deal with the devil, or in this case, with the devil you know. But I'm curious about the internal IRGC dynamics during this. Were they a monolith? Was there a faction that wanted a different outcome? Maybe a more clerical leader?
That's an excellent question. The IRGC wasn't and isn't a single mind. There were certainly ideologically rigid elements who might have preferred a more prominent marja. But the institution's primary interest, forged in war, was survival and autonomy. Khamenei offered continuity and a guarantee against being sidelined by a more powerful clerical figure. The institutional consensus favored stability, and Khamenei was the stability candidate. The pragmatist won out.
And from that point on, the expansion is staggering. We're talking about a state within a state being built in plain sight. Through the 90s and 2000s, their political power grows. Former IRGC commanders take governorships, parliamentary seats. Their economic power explodes.
Through the Khatam al-Anbiya conglomerate,
which started as a wartime engineering and logistics unit. By the 2000s, it's this sprawling empire. Construction, oil and gas, telecommunications, finance. Estimates by 2020 put its assets at over $100 billion. It's not just a business. It's a mechanism for patronage, for funding off-book operations, and for making the IRGC's interests inseparable from the national economy. Can you give us a tangible example of how this works? Like a specific project or sector?
Sure. Take the South Pars gas field, one of the world's largest. For years, key development contracts weren't given to international oil companies or even fully civilian Iranian firms. They were awarded to Qatam al-Anbiya. This accomplishes several things. It funnels billions into IRGC coffers, it gives them control over a strategic national resource, and it employs thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on the guards. It's a perfect feedback loop of money, power, and loyalty. And it started in earnest in the 2000s, under President Ahmadinejad, a former Basij member himself.
And their military reach extends far beyond Iran's borders.
That's the Quds Force evolution. Formally established in the late 80s, it really comes into its own under Qasem Soleimani in the 2000s. It moves from advising to directly managing proxy networks across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, Assad's forces in Syria. This external arm serves a dual purpose. It projects power, and it gives the IRGC a foreign policy portfolio independent of, and sometimes in tension with, the diplomatic corps.
That tension is fascinating. There have been reports of the Foreign Ministry being blindsided by Quds Force actions. It's like having a shadow diplomatic service with its own army.
Precisely. And this isn't just about ideology, it's about institutional turf. Every conflict zone where the Quds Force operates is also a business opportunity for IRGC-linked firms, rebuilding Syria, for instance. So by the time we get to, say, the 2009 election protests,
the template is set. The IRGC's role in crushing the Green Movement protests wasn't an aberration. It was a replay of their founding mandate to guard the regime from internal threats. They were the enforcers. And by then, they weren't just taking orders. They were partners in power with Khamenei, who had by fully evolved from the tentative successor of 1989 into a leader whose authority was deeply intertwined with theirs.
And here's a crucial follow-up. After 2009, the political takeover accelerated. The IRGC didn't just suppress dissent, they used it to purge rival power centers. Reformists and even pragmatic conservatives were sidelined. The intelligence ministry was brought under tighter control. The system became more securitized, with IRGC veterans placed in key judicial, media, and cultural positions. It was a consolidation phase, directly following the playbook of securing the regime from within.
Which brings us to the present day, the recent upheavals.
Right? With the recent passing of Khamenei himself, we're seeing the 1989 template activated again, but with a crucial difference.
The IRGC is no longer just the kingmaker. It's the kingdom.
That's the acceleration analysts are talking about. In 1989, they were a powerful institution that helped select the king. Today, evidence suggests they are effectively selecting from within their own ranks or elevating figures like Mojtaba Khamenei, whose power base is entirely dependent on them. The constitutional veneer is there, but the center of gravity has decisively shifted toward the IRGC as an institution. The clerical establishment is now often secondary. Think about it, who holds the real power? The 85-year-old cleric in the Supreme Leader's office, or the commanders of the IRGC, the Basiji, and the intelligence apparatus who control the streets and the economy?
It's like they've completed the inversion. The body formed to guard the revolution now is the revolutionary state. The tail is not just whacking the dog, the tail has grown a new head. But is there any pushback? From within the clerical establishment, or even from more traditionalist elements within the IRGC itself?
There are tensions, certainly. Some senior clerics in Qom quietly bemoan the militarization of the state, but they have no lever of power to pull. Within the IRGC, there are debates over strategy, how confrontational to be with the West, how much to spend on foreign adventures versus domestic needs, but not over the fundamental principle of their dominance. The system has become self-reinforcing, and that has profound implications. It means Iran's strategic decisions, its foreign adventures, its repression at home. These are increasingly driven by the institutional interests of a military-economic complex, not by clerical ideology or even conventional diplomatic strategy. It's more pragmatic in some ways, more brutal in others, and far more resilient.
Resilient because?
because it's decentralized and economically self-sustaining. You can't decapitate this structure by removing one leader. It's a network. The Quds Force, the Basij, the Cyber Command, the economic conglomerates. They all have their own leadership and can operate semi-autonomously. This makes the regime incredibly tough to pressure or topple. Sanctions hurt the Iranian people, but the IRGC's empire is designed to evade them through black markets, smuggling networks, and front companies. It's an octopus. You can cut off a tentacle, but the body survives.
Which brings us to a practical takeaway for anyone trying to understand Iran today. You can't just look at the Supreme Leader's office. You have to follow the money and the guns, and they both lead back to the IRGC's sprawling empire.
100%. Monitoring their economic holdings, who's getting the construction contracts, which sectors they're moving into, is a better indicator of internal power shifts than parsing clerical statements. Same with the Basij mobilization patterns. They're the regime's nervous system. Here's a fun fact, or rather a grim one. The Basij's organizational structure is often mapped onto Iran's postal code system. That's how deeply integrated they are into the social fabric. They can mobilize at a neighborhood level based on zip codes.
That's chillingly efficient. And for future transitions, this 1989 model suggests it's an internal IRGC consensus process, not a popular or even a purely clerical one. The next leader will be whoever the Commander's Council can agree on, someone who protects their interests.
Which makes the whole system more predictable in one sense. It will act to preserve itself and less predictable in another, because the internal calculus of a military junta is always opaque. The wild card is whether the Iranian people, after all these years, will continue to accept a future decided by military men in closed rooms. The 2022 protests showed a society increasingly willing to chant against the entire structure, guards and all. The 1989 bargain may be reaching its expiration date with the public, even as the institution itself has never been stronger.
A question for another day, perhaps. For now, the lesson from 1989 is clear. The revolution created its own guardian, and the guardian eventually inherited the revolution.
It's the ultimate institutional coup, played out over decades, not in a single night. And it offers a case study in how revolutionary movements can be captured by their own security apparatuses, a story with echoes far beyond Iran's borders.
Thanks for diving into that with me, Herman. And thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop. Big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners.
We'll catch you next time. This episode was produced using DeepSeek v3.2. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my